Hey, guys, tonight we're embarking on a journey that's less about adrenaline and more about the slow, steady rhythm of camel hooves on dusty plains. The ancient Silk Road. Imagine, if you will, the cool desert air starting to bite as the sun dips below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. You're huddled around a flickering fire, the only light for miles, the scent of wood smoke mingling with the faint, exotic aroma of spices carried from lands you can only dream of. The vast, star-dusted canopy above feels impossibly close, each tiny pinprick of light a silent witness to millennia of footsteps, whispers, and dreams. You pull your rough wool cloak tighter, listening to the creak of saddle leather and the soft snorts of the resting camels, their massive silhouettes looming against the fading light. This isn't your average five-star resort. This is an unwritten chapter of history, a real, tangible connection to an era when simply getting from A to B was an epic, often life-threatening endeavor. Honestly, you probably wouldn't survive a week out here without a GPS and a sturdy air-conditioned vehicle, let alone the ancient equivalent of a satellite phone. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're there, aren't you? Feel the grit of sand beneath your makeshift bedroll, the distant howl of a desert fox, a sound that makes the hairs on your neck prickle, even though you know it's probably just looking for a midnight snack of, well, whatever desert foxes eat. We're not just talking about a single road. Remember, the Silk Road wasn't some neatly paved, easily signposted highway. It was a complex, shifting network of trade routes, a vast circulatory system connecting east and west for over 1,000 years. It began, in a sense, with the desire for something exotic, something not found in your backyard. Think about it. Why would someone risk life and limb for a bolt of silk or a pinch of pepper? Because these weren't just commodities. They were status symbols, medicines, symbols of power even. The earliest stirrings of what we now call the Silk Road can be traced back to the Han Dynasty in China, around the 2nd century BCE, when Emperor Wu sent out emissaries like Zhang Yan. His mission to find allies against the Xiongnu, a formidable nomadic group. He didn't find the allies he was looking for, not initially, but what he did find were new lands, new peoples, and, crucially, new goods. He brought back tales of Fergana horses, powerful animals that dwarfed the smaller Chinese breeds, and of dazzling Western products. This wasn't just trade. It was intelligence, gathering a soft power play disguised as diplomatic overtures. And it set the wheels, or rather the hooves, in motion. You see, before Zhang Qian's adventures, trade was often localized, a more regional affair. But his reports and subsequent expeditions showed the potential for vast intercontinental exchange. Suddenly, the desire for Chinese silk in Rome wasn't just a fantasy. It was a burgeoning reality. The Roman elite, draped in shimmering silk, probably had no real concept of the incredible journey that fabric made. The scorching deserts, the treacherous mountains, the countless hands it passed through. They probably just thought, ooh, fancy, while complaining about their taxes. It's a bit like ordering something online from halfway across the world today and grumbling about the shipping time. Imagine the original shipping time on the Silk Road. One mainstream historical fact to anchor us. The Silk Road's true genesis is often attributed to Zhang Qian's missions from 138 BCE to 126 BCE, and again from 119 BCE to 115 BCE, which significantly expanded Chinese knowledge of the western regions and opened up official trade routes. Before this, there was exchange, sure, but it was sporadic, less organized. Think of it as the difference between a garage sale and Amazon.com. This was the Amazon.com moment for ancient Eurasia. Now, for a quirky tidbit. Did you know that one of the earliest secrets that travelers had to contend with was how silk was actually made? For centuries, the Chinese fiercely guarded the sericulture process. They didn't want anyone else muscling in on their lucrative monopoly. Legend has it that the secret was finally smuggled out of China by a princess who hid silkworm eggs and mulberry seeds in her elaborate headdress when she married a foreign prince. Talk about a royal conspiracy. Imagine explaining that one to customs. Is that a live insect habitat on your head, Your Highness? It just goes to show you sometimes the most valuable cargo isn't gold or jewels, but knowledge. And sometimes it's just a few very tiny, hungry caterpillars. Historians still argue whether the Silk Road was a single, coherent entity, or merely a collection of interconnected regional routes. Some scholars lean towards the idea of a cohesive network, a grand design, while others view it as a more organic, spontaneous development, a patchwork quilt of trails stitched together by individual ambition and necessity. It's a bit like asking if the internet was designed or just happened through countless individual connections. The truth, as often happens, probably lies somewhere in the middle. It was both evolving and adapting over time, with certain arteries becoming more prominent than others, depending on political stability demand and the whims of powerful empires. The early travelers, those pioneers of transcontinental trade, weren't exactly enjoying a pleasure cruise. You're not checking into a 5-star hotel with a continental breakfast. You're dealing with extreme temperatures, from baking desert days to freezing mountain nights. You're facing the constant threat of bandits, which we'll get to later, and the equally deadly threat of disease. Water was a precious commodity, often more valuable than gold. Food was basic, preserved, and monotonous. Your entertainment was the endless expanse of sky, the stories of your fellow travelers, and the gnawing anxiety about what tomorrow would bring. They were tough, those early Silk Roaders, hardened by necessity, driven by the promise of profit, or perhaps simply by an insatiable curiosity about what lay beyond the next dune, the next mountain pass. They carried not just goods, but stories, ideas, technologies, and even diseases inadvertently, weaving a complex tapestry of human connection across vast distances. This wasn't just about moving products. It was about moving entire cultures, piece by painstaking piece under the watchful eye of the stars. And as the night deepens, you can almost hear the echoes of their footsteps whispering across the millennia. As the first faint streaks of dawn begin to paint the eastern sky, you stir from your restless sleep, the sand already warming beneath your body. The chill of the desert night quickly gives way to the relentless embrace of the sun. This is the rhythm of the caravan, a constant push and pull between the extremes of temperature. You pull yourself up, brush the sand from your clothes, and join the others as they begin the painstaking process of readying the camels. These aren't just beasts of burden. They are the true heroes of the desert, the living engines of the Silk Road. Their wide, leathery feet are perfectly adapted for the shifting sands, and their ability to store water for days, sometimes weeks, is nothing short of miraculous. Without them, the vast, arid stretches of the Taklamakan Desert or the Arabian Peninsula would have remained insurmountable barriers, not highways of commerce. You watch as a grizzled camel driver, his face weathered by countless suns and winds, patiently loads a bale of silk onto a camel's hump, securing it with ropes as thick as your wrist. There's a quiet dignity in his movements, a centuries-old ritual passed down through generations. The desert, while seemingly barren, is alive with its own subtle energies. You feel the constant, almost imperceptible shift of the sand underfoot. The air shimmers in the distance, creating mirages that play tricks on your tired eyes. A shimmering lake that vanishes as you approach a distant city that turns out to be nothing more than a rock formation. These optical illusions could be deadly, luring desperate travelers off course in search of non-existent water. Navigation, therefore, was paramount. Travelers often relied on the stars at night, a celestial compass that never faltered. During the day, they used the sun's position, familiar landmarks, if any existed, and the invaluable knowledge passed down from seasoned guides who knew the desert like the back of their sun-scorched hands. You learn quickly to spot the faint tracks of previous caravans, to recognize the subtle changes in terrain that indicate a hidden wadi or a less treacherous path. One mainstream historical fact about desert travel caravans typically moved during the cooler parts of the day, often starting before dawn and continuing until late morning, then resting during the scorching midday heat and resuming their journey in the late afternoon, sometimes continuing into the night if the moon was bright enough. This wasn't for fun. It was pure survival. Imagine trying to trudge through soft sand under a 120-degree Fahrenheit sun, wearing layers of wool. You'd melt faster than a forgotten ice cream cone on asphalt. A quirky tidbit that might make you chuckle, or at least give you a weary smile, is the use of singing sands as navigational aids. In some parts of the desert, particularly the towering dunes of the Taklamakan, the sand under the right conditions of humidity and wind would emit a low hum or even a resonant singing sound. Locals would sometimes use these audible dunes to guide them in fog or darkness, a natural if eerie siren song of the desert. Historians still argue whether the phenomenon of singing sands was genuinely helpful for navigation or more of a psychological curiosity that added to the mystique and terror of the desert. Some propose it was a known landmark, while others suggest it was too inconsistent to be reliable for precise direction. Personally, I think it sounds like a terrible sleep aid. Oh, the desert is humming a lullaby of impending doom again. Lovely. But the oases. The oases. These were the true jewels of the desert green islands of life in a sea of sand. You can practically taste the fresh water. As you approach one, the air growing cooler, the scent of damp earth and growing plants replacing the dry, dusty smell of the desert. The relief washes over you like a cool wave. Here, you could rest, replenish your water skins, and allow your camels to graze. Oases weren't just water sources. They were miniature cities, bustling hubs of activity, where caravans converged, news was exchanged, goods were traded, and repairs were made. Imagine the scene: merchants haggling in a dozen different languages, camel drivers tending to their animals, local villagers selling fresh dates and woven mats, the air thick with the aroma of cooking food and the chatter of hundreds of weary travelers. It was a temporary melting pot, a brief respite from the endless trek before the desert swallowed you whole again. These oases also served as vital communication nodes. News traveled at the speed of a camel's walk, but it did travel. Stories of distant empires, whispers of political upheavals, news of market prices, and even gossip about powerful figures would ripple through these stopping points. You might hear about a new emperor in Chang'an, or a drought in Persia, or a successful raid by steppe nomads. Information was currency, and at the oases you could acquire it. It was like the ancient world's internet cafe, but with more sand and fewer cat videos. You'd gather around a fire, nursing a cup of strong tea, and listen as someone recounted a tale from the other side of the known world, their voice a low drone against the symphony of the desert night. The meticulous preparation for desert travel was a science in itself. Every item had a purpose. Water skins made from animal hide carefully treated to prevent leakage were paramount. Food was often dried or preserved. Dates, dried fruits, hardtack, and sometimes cured meats. Clothing was practical and layered. Light, loose garments for insulation against both heat and cold, and turbans, or head coverings to protect against the sun and sand. You quickly learn to appreciate the simple wisdom of these practical necessities. Modern luxury, you realize, is a relatively recent invention. Back then, luxury was simply surviving, and the desert held its own terrors beyond the obvious. Sandstorms, for instance, could appear with terrifying speed, reducing visibility to zero, and burying entire caravans in swirling, suffocating sand. You hear stories of those who simply vanished, swallowed by the dunes their bones never found. You learn to read the subtle signs in the wind, the faint darkening of the distant horizon that might herald an approaching storm, giving you precious minutes to hunker down and cover yourselves and your animals. It's a reminder of how utterly powerless you are against the raw forces of nature when you're out there, just you and your faithful camels against the vast, indifferent desert. This constant vigilance, this deep respect for the environment, was etched into the very soul of the Silk Road traveler. You weren't conquering the desert. You were merely passing through it, a humble guest in its immense and unforgiving domain. Each sunrise brought the promise of progress, and each sunset brought the relief of rest, a brief pause before the next leg of this epic ancient journey. The last embers of the cooking fire wink out, leaving you in near total darkness, save for the incredible blaze of stars overhead. You're no longer just a traveler. You're momentarily part of the ancient nomadic tapestry that stretched across the vast steppes of Central Asia. The air here isn't thick with sand, but carries the crisp scent of dry grass, and perhaps the faint musk of horses. The silence is profound, broken only by the soft snorts of the tethered ponies and the rhythmic breathing of your companions. This is the realm of the nomadic peoples, the skilled horsemen and herders who were both indispensable facilitators and formidable challenges for Silk Road caravans. You might be resting in a yurt, or a jirar, the portable round felt tents that have housed these communities for millennia. Imagine the ingenuity of a home that can be packed up and moved in a matter of hours, following the pasture lands or the trade routes. The walls are insulated with layers of felt surprisingly effective at keeping out both the biting cold and the scorching heat. Inside, it's surprisingly cozy. The low table laden with dried meat, fermented mare's milk arag, and perhaps some hard cheese. Life here revolves around the horse. These aren't just animals. They are extensions of the nomadic body, providing transport, sustenance, and status. You've seen them, these sturdy, swift steppe ponies, galloping across the open plains with effortless grace, their riders seemingly part of the beast. It's an ancient bond, a partnership forged over countless generations. The nomadic way of life, constantly moving, meant a different relationship with the land and with possessions. Everything had to be portable, functional, and durable. You wouldn't find grand static cities here, but rather a fluid network of encampments, shifting with the seasons and the needs of their herds. Their wealth wasn't in land deeds, but in livestock and the freedom of movement. One mainstream historical fact about these nocturnal visions: many nomadic groups, such as the Xiongnu, who we mentioned earlier and later, the Mongols exerted significant influence, both positive and negative, on the Silk Road. They could be formidable raiders, disrupting trade and demanding tribute, but they were also crucial conduits, providing protection guides and often transporting goods themselves across vast distances. Their intimate knowledge of the terrain and their mastery of horsemanship made them indispensable for traversing the steppes. Now, for a quirky tidbit, the nomads, despite their seemingly simple lifestyle, were often incredibly skilled artisans, particularly in metalwork and felt production. They crafted intricate gold and silver ornaments, practical yet beautiful, and their felt-making techniques allowed them to create incredibly durable and warm textiles for their yurts and clothing. Some historians believe that techniques for complex felt patterning may have influenced later textile arts further west. Imagine crafting a perfectly circular weatherproof home, entirely from wool and ingenuity. It's a testament to human adaptability, isn't it? Historians still argue whether the nomadic empires, such as the Mongol Empire, ultimately facilitated or hindered long-distance trade on the Silk Road more. On one hand, their unified control over vast territories, especially under the Pax Mongolica, arguably created an unprecedented period of relative peace and security that allowed trade to flourish. They built post stations, protected merchants, and encouraged exchange. On the other hand, their initial conquests were often devastating, destroying established cities and disrupting existing trade networks. It's a classic chicken and egg, or perhaps more accurately, conqueror and merchant debate. Did they break it to build it better, or was the destruction an unfortunate but necessary side effect of their empire building? As night settles deeper, you hear the distant baying of dogs, the protectors of the nomadic encampment. Their keen senses are a vital early warning system against both animal predators and human intruders. You learn to trust their instincts, those sharp barks cutting through the stillness of the night. You also learn about the rich oral traditions of these people. Without written records, in the same way as settled societies, stories, histories, and epic poems were passed down from generation to generation around the campfire. You might hear tales of heroic warriors, of legendary hunts of the spirits that inhabit the wind and the mountains. These narratives weren't just entertainment. They were the collective memory of the tribe, a way to transmit knowledge and values. The hospitality of the nomads, surprisingly, could be legendary. Despite their fierce reputation when provoked, a weary traveler often found a warm, welcome food and shelter in their yurts. This wasn't just altruism. It was practical. News traveled with travelers, and good relations meant future opportunities for trade or alliances. It was a reciprocal system born of necessity and interdependence. You realize that the Silk Road wasn't just about big empires and grand armies. It was about countless small individual interactions, moments of shared humanity across vast cultural divides. As you lie there, nestled within the felt walls of the yurt, you can almost feel the presence of centuries of nomadic peoples who have passed this way, their spirits still riding the wind. Their connection to the land and to the cycles of nature was profound, a stark contrast to the often rigid structures of settled civilizations. They were the original road warriors adapting, surviving, and shaping the course of history without ever building a single permanent city. And their nighttime stories whispered around the flickering flame were the pulse of the steppe connecting past, present, and future in the vast, silent expanse. The stars outside seemed to twinkle with ancient secrets, secrets known only to those who truly lived under their unblinking gaze. Leaving the vast open steppes behind you, feel the ground begin to change subtly, at first, then undeniably. The endless horizon gives way to rising undulations, and soon you're looking up at jagged peaks that scrape against the sky. This is where the Silk Road truly flexed its muscles, not just over deserts and plains, but through some of the most formidable mountain ranges on Earth. You begin your slow, arduous ascent into the Pamir Mountains, often called the roof of the world. The air grows thinner, colder, and your breath plumes in front of you. Every step becomes a conscious effort, the incline relentless. The path often no wider than a goat track, carved into the sheer rock face. This isn't a stroll in the park. This is a challenge to your very will. The camels, those desert champions, are replaced by hardier, shaggier beasts, yaks and sturdy mountain ponies better suited for the steep, rocky terrain and the dizzying altitudes. Their hooves find purchase where yours might slip, and you learn to trust their steady pace. The landscape here is breathtakingly stark, colossal snow-capped peaks that seem to touch the heavens, deep echoing valleys and glaciers that gleam like frozen rivers. But this beauty comes with immense danger. Avalanches are a constant threat, especially during certain seasons, capable of burying entire sections of the path and tragically entire caravans. Rockfalls can cascade down without warning, sending boulders crashing into the narrow trails. You learn to listen for the ominous rumble, to eye the unstable overhangs, and to move swiftly through known danger zones. It's a constant dance with peril, a test of nerve and endurance. One mainstream historical fact about these high-altitude passages: the Pamir Mountains, the Hindu Kush, and the Tian Shan Ranges presented some of the most formidable natural barriers on the Silk Road, forcing travelers to adapt their equipment animals and travel strategies significantly. Routes like the Wakjir Pass, though incredibly challenging, were vital arteries connecting the disparate regions, allowing goods to flow from Central Asia to India and from China to the Middle East. Here's a quirky tidbit to lighten the mood, though it wasn't exactly funny at the time. Mountain sickness or altitude sickness was a very real and debilitating problem for travelers unaccustomed to the heights. Ancient texts describe symptoms like dizziness, nausea, headaches, and extreme fatigue. The same delightful sensations you might experience today if you suddenly decided to climb Everest without acclimatizing. Imagine trying to conduct a complex trade negotiation when you feel like your head is about to explode and your stomach is doing some interpretive dance. Historians still argue whether the precise routes through these mountain passes remained consistent over centuries, or if they shifted frequently due to environmental changes, political control, or the discovery of marginally less treacherous paths. Some theories suggest a remarkable stability in the main arteries, while others propose a dynamic, ever-changing network of trails, with some paths falling into disuse as new ones emerged. It's a complex puzzle, piecing together fragments of evidence from ancient maps, which were, shall we say, a bit less precise than Google Maps and traveler accounts. night in the mountains is a different kind of cold. The air is bone-chillingly crisp, and the wind, unimpeded by trees or buildings, can howl through the passes with an almost predatory sound. You huddle closer to the fire, its warmth a precious commodity, trying to ignore the way the cold seeps into your bones. Shelter is often found in natural caves or in makeshift camps established in sheltered hollows. Sometimes, rudimentary guest houses or caravanserais were built in the more populated mountain valleys, offering a degree of comfort. A roof over your head, a communal meal, and perhaps a warm place to sleep beside the livestock. These were sanctuaries, literal lifelines, in an otherwise hostile environment, places where travelers could recover their strength and prepare for the next grueling leg of their journey. The guides in these mountain regions were invaluable. They weren't just showing you the way. They were experts in mountain lore, able to predict weather changes, identify safe paths, and even spot the telltale signs of potential danger. They knew which passes were open in which seasons, and which were perpetually shrouded in snow or ice. You quickly learned to trust their judgment implicitly, your life often literally depending on their experience. Their knowledge was passed down through generations, a living map etched into their minds, more reliable than any parchment scroll. Despite the hardships, there was also a unique beauty to mountain travel. The silence could be profound, broken only by the crunch of snow or the distant roar of a mountain stream. The views when you reached a high vantage point were unparalleled. Endless vistas of peaks and valleys stretching to the horizon, making you feel both incredibly small and immensely connected to the grandeur of the world. It was a place where physical challenge met spiritual awe, forcing you to confront your own limits and the raw power of nature. And as you try to find a comfortable spot on the hard ground, wrapped tightly in your cloak, you listen to the wind whistling through the mountain passes, a timeless song echoing the journeys of countless others who came before you. Their whispers carried on the cold mountain air. The biting mountain wind begins to soften the air, growing perceptibly warmer, and the rugged, unyielding rock faces gradually give way to more verdant landscapes. You feel a subtle shift in the current of your journey. As you descend from the high passes, a sense of gravity, gently pulling you towards the life-giving arteries of the land, the rivers. The Silk Road wasn't exclusively about overland travel. Mighty rivers played a crucial, though often overlooked role in connecting distant regions and facilitating the flow of goods and ideas. Imagine the scene now. The gentle lapping of water against the hull of a flat-bottomed boat, the rhythmic splash of oars, or the creak of a rope as a barge is towed upstream. You're no longer battling the endless sand or the thin mountain air. You're navigating the ancient waterways that whispered tales of distant lands, such as the Oxus Amudarya or the Jaxartes Sirdarya in Central Asia, or even sections of the Yellow River in China. These rivers weren't always smooth sailing, of course. You might encounter rapids that demanded skillful navigation, or shallow stretches that required your boatmen to punt with long poles. But the relative ease of moving large quantities of goods by water, compared to the painstaking effort of overland caravans, made them invaluable. A single barge could carry the equivalent of dozens of camel loads, drastically reducing the cost and effort of transport. This meant that bulkier, heavier goods that were impractical to carry across deserts and mountains could now be part of the trade network. Timber, pottery grains, even large blocks of stone for construction. It truly opened up new possibilities for commerce. One mainstream historical fact about these riverine journeys: Major rivers like the Amu Darya and Sir Darya were vital waterways for local and regional trade, connecting nomadic steppe peoples with settled agricultural communities and acting as important tributaries to the broader Silk Road network. They allowed goods to flow from Central Asia towards the Caspian Sea and beyond or eastwards into the heartland of various empires. Here's a quirky tidbit about ancient river travel that might make you think twice about a modern cruise. Before the invention of complex locks and dams, boats often had to be portaged, physically dragged overland, around waterfalls, or particularly treacherous rapids. Imagine the effort involved in hauling a heavily laden boat, perhaps with the help of oxen or dozens of human laborers for miles over rough terrain, just to bypass a dangerous stretch of river. It truly puts modern logistics into perspective. You probably wouldn't complain about a small luggage fee after seeing that. Historians still argue whether riverine trade routes were predominantly used for local and regional exchange, or if they were integrated seamlessly into the long-distance transcontinental journeys of the Silk Road. Some scholars emphasize their role as feeder routes, bringing goods to the main overland arteries. Others suggest that for certain periods and regions, water transport was the primary mode of long-distance trade, especially for goods that were too heavy or bulky for land caravans. It's a debate about the scale and significance of these watery paths within the grand tapestry of the Silk Road. As evening descends upon the river, the air cools and the sounds of the water become more prominent. The gentle gurgle against the hull, the distant croaking of frogs, the splash of a fish jumping. You might tie up for the night on a riverbank building a small fire to ward off the chill and cook a simple meal. The stars overhead seem even more expansive when viewed from the open water, reflected dimly in the dark surface of the river. Along the riverbanks, you would find bustling river ports and smaller settlements where goods were transferred between land and water transport, and where river communities had their own distinct cultures, often based around fishing boat building and trade. These were places of constant movement, a transient population of boatmen, merchants, and laborers. The cultural significance of these rivers was immense. They weren't just routes for goods. They were pathways for ideas. Religions, languages, and artistic styles flowed along their currents. You might encounter Buddhist monks traveling upstream carrying sacred texts, or Persian merchants bringing new designs for textiles. The exchange was constant, enriching the communities along the banks and further west. You realize that these rivers were living entities constantly shaping the lives of those who lived by them and traveled upon them. The hazards of river travel, while different from those of the desert or mountains, were still very real. Sudden floods could turn a placid river into a raging torrent, sweeping away boats and settlements. Sandbars could strand vessels for days. And of course, there was always the threat of river pirates who would prey on unsuspecting boats in secluded stretches. Vigilance was key, and boatmen often traveled in small convoys for mutual protection. You learn to appreciate the skill of the boatmen, their intimate knowledge of the river's moods, their ability to read the currents and navigate hidden obstacles. They were the unsung heroes of the watery Silk Road, their lives inextricably linked to the ebb and flow of the ancient waterways. And as you drift off to sleep, rocked gently by the river's embrace, you feel a profound sense of continuity, a connection to the countless souls who traveled these very currents, their dreams and destinations carried along by the tireless flow of the water, the rhythmic lapping of the river water, is replaced by the muted murmur of voices, the clinking of coins, and the rustle of fabrics. You've arrived at one of the bustling caravanserai, an ancient roadside inn, or perhaps a larger market town. As dusk deepens and the last rays of sunlight stretch across the courtyard, the real work of the Silk Road often began the meticulous, often tense dance of trade and negotiation. This wasn't just about buying and selling. It was about building relationships, establishing trust, and understanding the intricate web of supply and demand that stretched across continents. You watch as merchants from different lands, their faces etched with the fatigue of travel, unpack their precious cargo. A vibrant cascade of silks, shimmering jade fragrant spices, and gleaming metals. The air is thick with anticipation, the scent of exotic goods, and the palpable energy of commerce. Imagine the seen groups of merchants huddled together, some speaking in broken common tongues, others relying on skilled interpreters, their hands gesturing, their eyes keen. The setting sun casts long, dramatic shadows across the dusty courtyard, adding to the almost theatrical atmosphere. This wasn't a quick online transaction. It was a slow, deliberate process, often spanning days, sometimes even weeks. You'd share meals, tell stories, and assess each other's character before the serious bartering began. Trust was paramount, because legal recourse was often limited or non-existent once you were out on the road. A merchant's reputation once lost was hard to regain. One mainstream historical fact about these midnight pacts: the development of complex trade practices, including letters of credit and bills of exchange, allowed merchants to reduce the risks of carrying large amounts of physical currency. This was a crucial innovation, transforming cumbersome cash transactions into more secure paper-based agreements, often facilitated by established trading houses or banking families. Think of it as ancient Venmo, but a bit more official and with fewer emojis. Now, for a quirky tidbit. The exchange of goods wasn't always straightforward currency for commodity. Sometimes goods were bartered directly, or payment might involve a complex mix of different currencies and goods. Imagine a scenario where a Chinese merchant might accept Persian silver coins, a bolt of Indian cotton, and a promise of future delivery of spices in exchange for his silk. It required an impressive mental ledger, or perhaps a very skilled accountant with a very large abacus, and you thought calculating sales tax was hard. Historians still argue whether the primary driving force behind Silk Road trade was luxury goods for elites or staple goods for wider consumption. Some scholars contend that the enormous risks and costs involved meant only high-value, low-volume luxury items, like silk spices and precious stones, were economically viable for long-distance transport. Others argue that, over time, a significant trade in more common goods like ceramics, glass, and even certain agricultural products developed, demonstrating a broader economic impact beyond just the super rich. It's a debate about who truly benefited most from this ancient globalization. As the stars emerge, the caravanserai truly comes alive. Fires are lit, filling the air with the aroma of diverse cuisines. Storytellers might gather a crowd, their voices weaving tales of distant lands, providing entertainment for weary travelers. News and rumors, as we mentioned earlier, were exchanged like valuable commodities. You'd learn about prices in Samarkand, the latest fashions in Constantinople, or the political stability or instability of various kingdoms along the route. This was the ancient world's information superhighway, all powered by human interaction and the shared need for commerce. The currencies used were as diverse as the people. You might encounter Chinese copper cash, Persian silver dirhams, Roman gold solidi, and various local coins often weighed to determine their true value, rather than simply accepted at face value. This required a certain level of trust, or at least a very good set of scales, and a keen eye for counterfeits. The concept of a universal currency was far off, making every significant transaction a mini-adventure in numismatics. The merchants themselves were a fascinating breed. They were not just businessmen. They were adventurers, diplomats, and sometimes unintentional cultural ambassadors. They carried not only goods, but also ideas, technologies, and religious beliefs across vast distances. A Buddhist merchant from India might introduce his faith to a Zoroastrian fire worshipper in Persia, or a Nestorian Christian might share tales of the West with a Confucian scholar from China. These nighttime discussions, often around a shared meal, fostered a surprising degree of cross-cultural understanding and exchange. The trust forged under the starlight, sealed with a handshake or a shared cup of tea, was often more binding than any written contract. It was a personal bond reinforced by the shared hardships of the journey and the mutual desire for a successful transaction. And as you finally settle down for the night, the sounds of distant chatter and the soft snorts of the resting camels your lullaby, you realize that these ancient trade routes were not just about profit, but about the profound, often quiet connections between people from vastly different worlds. These were the true foundations of the Silk Road's enduring legacy. As the first light of dawn filters into the caravanserai, painting the courtyard in soft gold, you begin to truly appreciate the incredible diversity of goods that crisscrossed these ancient paths. This wasn't just about raw materials. It was about the culmination of human ingenuity and desire manifested in a dazzling array of objects. The air, which hours ago was thick with the scent of campfires and negotiation, now carries faint whiffs of exotic perfumes, dried fruits, and the lingering sweetness of spices. You see a merchant carefully unfurling a bolt of shimmering silk, its colors catching the morning light, feeling its exquisite softness against your fingertips. This was the undisputed queen of the Silk Road, the very commodity that gave the routes their enduring name, and the reason emperors and empresses across continents coveted its touch. But beyond silk, there was a veritable feast for the senses. You observe sacks filled with spices, peppercorns from India, cinnamon from Ceylon, cloves from Indonesia, each grain carrying the aromatic memory of distant, sun-drenched lands. These weren't just flavor enhancers. They were preservatives, medicines, perfumes, and potent symbols of wealth. Imagine the cook in a Roman villa trying to recreate a dish with just local herbs, then tasting something seasoned with true Indian pepper for the first time. Mind blown right. Then there's the gleam of precious stones. Jade from Khotan, lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, rubies from Badakhshan. Each one a fragment of the earth's ancient beauty, destined for crown's jewelry, or perhaps to adorn a sacred statue. One mainstream historical fact about these valuable commodities: while silk was the most famous export from China, it was far from the only one. China also exported porcelain tea, though tea trade became dominant later paper and gunpowder, all of which had a profound impact on the cultures they reached. Conversely, the West sent gold, silver, wool, glass, and horses eastward, creating a complex bidirectional flow of goods and wealth. Here's a quirky tidbit. Imagine being an ancient perfume maker along the Silk Road. You might have sourced rare musk from Himalayan deer ambergris, from whale secretions found on beaches, or civet from Ethiopian civet cats, mixing them with fragrant resins like frankincense and myrrh from Arabia. These scents were not just about smelling good. They were used in religious ceremonies as medicines and as status symbols. You'd probably smell like a very well-traveled, highly aromatic walking antique shop by the end of your journey. Historians still argue whether the flow of cultural and technological ideas was primarily unidirectional from east to west, or if it was a more balanced, reciprocal exchange. While China certainly exported groundbreaking innovations like paper and gunpowder, the West, particularly the Roman Empire, contributed valuable goods and ideas in areas like glassmaking and architectural techniques. It's a debate about the true give and take of the Silk Road rather than a simple narrative of one-way transmission. As the morning progresses, you see other goods being handled with care rolls of finely woven carpets from Persia, their intricate patterns telling stories of their creators. Delicate glassware from the Roman Empire and the Middle East, a testament to the skill of ancient artisans. Gleaming bronze mirrors and polished metalwork from Central Asia. Even animals were traded powerful horses, camels, exotic birds, and sometimes even wild animals destined for imperial menageries. Imagine the logistics of transporting a tiger across a desert. That's a cargo, won't stop complaining kind of problem. The value of these goods wasn't just monetary, it was also cultural and transformative. The introduction of new crops like grapes, pomegranates, and alfalfa from the West into China changed Chinese agriculture and cuisine. Sericulture, the art of silk making, eventually spread westward, ending China's monopoly, but also creating new industries in places like Byzantium. Paper, an indispensable Chinese invention, revolutionized record-keeping scholarship and communication wherever it arrived. These weren't just items. They were catalysts for change, silently reshaping societies as they moved from hand to hand, caravan to caravanserai. Even ideas traveled as goods. Buddhist scriptures from India, Nestorian Christian texts from Syria, Zoroastrian philosophies from Persia. These were as much cargo as the silks and spices carried by pilgrims, monks, and devout merchants. They were discussed, debated, and eventually translated, influencing local beliefs and creating entirely new cultural syntheses. The Silk Road was a vast, open-air library and laboratory constantly exchanging, experimenting, and evolving. As the sun climbs higher, you feel the familiar warmth of the day taking hold. The caravan is preparing to move again, the diverse array of goods meticulously packed and secured for the next leg of their incredible journey. You realize that every object you've seen, every scent you've inhaled, carries with it a whisper of its origin, a ghost of the hands that made it, and the long, silent journey it has undertaken. And as you fall into step with the caravan, you feel yourself becoming a small, temporary part of that endless, fascinating flow. As the day draws to a close and you settle down for another night on the road, perhaps in a larger, more permanent settlement along the route, you sense a palpable shift in the atmosphere. This isn't just a place for trading goods. It's a vibrant hub where entirely different worlds collide, mingle, and sometimes merge. You're standing at a cultural crossroads, a place where the air is thick with the scent of diverse cuisines, the murmur of countless languages, and the visual tapestry of vastly different peoples, all united by the common thread of the Silk Road. Imagine observing a Buddhist monk from Gandhara, debating philosophy with a Zoroastrian priest from Persia, while in the background a Nestorian Christian merchant from Syria haggles over prices with a Confucian scholar from China. It's a dynamic, often noisy melting pot of humanity. These encounters weren't always harmonious, human nature being what it is, but they were undeniably transformative. Ideas about religion, philosophy, art, and science flowed as freely as the silks and spices. Buddhism, for instance, spread from India into China, adapting and evolving as it passed through the diverse cultures of Central Asia, leaving behind stunning cave temples adorned with vibrant frescoes in places like Dunhuang and Bamiyan. Christianity, specifically, Nestorian Christianity, also found its way along these routes, establishing communities as far east as China. Zoroastrianism, Manichaeism, and later Islam all left their indelible marks influencing local beliefs and practices. One mainstream historical fact about these cultural exchanges: the Silk Road was instrumental in the transmission of major world religions across Eurasia. Buddhism, in particular, saw its most significant expansion through the Silk Road network, carried by missionaries and merchants who established monasteries and proselytized along the routes, profoundly shaping the spiritual landscape of Central Asia and East Asia. Here's a quirky tidbit. Beyond the grand religions, countless local superstitions and folk beliefs also traveled the Silk Road, sometimes merging with larger faiths. For example, ancient Persian beliefs in protective amulets or Central Asian shamanistic practices might find their way into the everyday lives of merchants from vastly different backgrounds, creating a fascinating blend of practical magic and organized religion. You might find a Buddhist merchant carrying a Persian eye amulet just in case. After all, when you're out on the Silk Road, a little extra luck can't hurt, right? Historians still argue whether the cultural exchange on the Silk Road was primarily a process of syncretism, where different traditions blended to create new forms, or more of an assimilation, where one dominant culture absorbed elements from others. Some scholars point to the unique styles of Buddhist art in Central Asia, which combined Indian Hellenistic and local elements as evidence of syncretism. Others argue that, particularly in certain periods, powerful empires like China or the Sasanian Empire exerted a stronger cultural pull, leading to assimilation. It's a debate about the true nature of integration versus influence. Artistic styles also journeyed across the Silk Road. The influences of Hellenistic Greek art carried eastward after Alexander the Great's conquests can be seen in the Buddhist sculptures of Gandhara, which depict Buddha with flowing robes and classical facial features. Persian motifs found their way into Chinese textiles, and Chinese porcelain designs inspired craftsmen as far away as the Middle East and Europe. Scientific knowledge, too, was exchanged. Chinese papermaking and printing techniques moved westward, while astronomical and medical knowledge from India and the Middle East traveled eastward. These weren't just random transfers. They were conversations, adaptations, and innovations spurred by cross-cultural exposure. Think about how challenging it must have been to communicate complex philosophical or religious ideas across vast linguistic and cultural divides. It required patience, open-mindedness, and often the dedicated work of translators and scribes. These unsung heroes of the Silk Road were crucial in bridging the intellectual gaps, allowing texts and concepts to transcend their original contexts and resonate in new lands. Imagine trying to explain quantum physics using only interpretive dance and a handful of dates. That's kind of what they were up against. As night deepens and the last of the day's discussions fade. You reflect on the invisible cargo carried along these routes, the intangible heritage of human thought and creativity. The Silk Road wasn't just a conduit for goods. It was a vast open-air university, a sprawling art gallery, and a spiritual pilgrimage route all rolled into one. The echoes of these countless conversations and the silent influence of these shared ideas still reverberate today, shaping the diverse tapestry of our modern world. And as you close your eyes, you can almost hear the soft whispers of ancient dialogues fading into the gentle hum of the night. The comfort of the settled caravanserai fades quickly as you resume your journey, and with it, the pervasive sense of security. The vast stretches of the Silk Road, while arteries of commerce were also fertile ground for danger. You're now acutely aware of the lurking threat that shadows every merchant and traveler bandits. The very thought sends a shiver down your spine, even in the morning sun. These weren't just petty thieves. They were organized groups, often well-armed and intimately familiar with the terrain, preying on the rich caravans laden with precious goods. Their methods could range from sudden, terrifying ambushes in narrow passes to strategic sieges of isolated sections of the route. The stakes were incredibly high, not just for your cargo, but for your life. Caravan leaders, experienced and hardened, understood this ever-present peril. They employed various methods of protection. The most obvious and often most effective was traveling in large groups. A large caravan, perhaps dozens or even hundreds of camels with numerous armed guards, presented a much less appealing target than a small, vulnerable group. You feel a small measure of comfort in the sheer numbers of your current companions. The sheer logistics of organizing such a large convoy, coordinating supplies, pace, and defense, were a monumental task in themselves, often requiring immense leadership skills. One mainstream historical fact about these dangers, the need for security, led to the development of various defensive strategies, including the formation of armed merchant guilds, the hiring of professional guards, often former soldiers or experienced local fighters, and the payment of protection money or tolls to powerful local rulers, or even sometimes to reformed bandit groups who promised safe passage through their territories. It was a complex, often morally ambiguous system of survival. Here's a quirky tidbit. Sometimes clever merchants would hide their most valuable goods within seemingly mundane cargo, like sacks of grain or bales of wool, hoping to deter opportunistic bandits who were looking for quick, obvious scores. Imagine a bandit ripping open a sack of grain only to find it filled with precious jade and rubies. Oh, darn it, I was really hoping for more grain. They'd probably grumble, bewildered. It was the ancient world's version of a secret compartment in your luggage. Historians still argue whether the threat of banditry was a constant, pervasive danger throughout the Silk Road's history, or if it waxed and waned significantly, depending on periods of political stability or instability. Some scholars suggest that during times of strong imperial control, like the Pax Romana or Pax Mongolica banditry, was largely suppressed. Others argue that, given the vastness of the routes and the fragmented nature of local power, opportunistic banditry was an endemic feature that travelers simply had to accept and mitigate. It's a debate about the true level of daily risk faced by merchants. Beyond sheer numbers, weapons were essential. Swords, bows, and arrows, spears, and later even early forms of firearms were carried. Guards were often stationed at strategic points within the caravan, particularly at the front, back, and flanks. Lookout points were established during rest, and vigilant watch was kept throughout the night. You learned to sleep lightly, one ear always attuned to the sounds of the night, ready to spring up at the first sign of trouble. The tension, even during peaceful stretches, is a constant undercurrent. The landscape itself could be an ally or an enemy. Narrow mountain passes thick forests, or desolate desert stretches could be prime ambush points. Knowing these choke points and having a plan for them was critical. Sometimes caravans would take longer, less direct routes to avoid known bandit strongholds, weighing the added time and supplies against the risk of attack. It was a constant calculation of risk versus reward. Another layer of protection came from the political powers along the route. Empires like the Han and Tang dynasties in China, the Roman and later Byzantine empires in the West, and various Central Asian kingdoms would often deploy troops to patrol key sections of the road within their territories. The presence of garrisons and watchtowers, particularly in China, offered a measure of security, though their reach was often limited. These military outposts also served as places where merchants could resupply and rest, a brief oasis of official order amidst the chaos. But sometimes the line between bandit and local lord or rebel faction could blur. Some powerful local chieftains, rather than outright attacking caravans, would demand heavy tolls or protection money for safe passage through their lands. Refusal often meant facing the wrath of their armed retinues, effectively legitimizing what was in essence a form of extortion. This was the dark side of Silk Road governance, paying for the privilege of not being robbed by the people who were supposed to be protecting you. It was a cynical reality, but one that travelers had to navigate with shrewdness and a thick wallet. As you gaze at the moonlit landscape, you understand that these ancient travelers weren't just carrying goods. They were carrying the weight of constant vigilance, the burden of uncertainty. Their journeys were a testament to human resilience, their courage often born out of sheer necessity, and the tantalizing promise of reward. And as you try to find some comfort in the hard ground, you remind yourself that for all the exotic goods and cultural exchange, the Silk Road was at its heart a perilous adventure, where survival was never guaranteed. The journey continues, but now, as you pass through desolate stretches where crumbling walls and mounds of earth hint at former glory, a different kind of silence settles over the caravan. This isn't the quiet of untamed wilderness, but the poignant hush of lost cities, once vibrant hubs of trade and culture, now swallowed by sand or time. You find yourself gazing at the skeletal remains of what was once a bustling caravanserai, its grand archways reduced to rubble, its once thriving marketplace now just an empty expanse where only the wind whispers ancient secrets. These ghost towns dot the Silk Road, silent testaments to the ephemeral nature of prosperity and power. Imagine a city like Merv in present-day Turkmenistan or Gaochang in China, once jewels of the Silk Road's strategic crossroads where goods, ideas, and people converged. At their peak, they boasted magnificent palaces, bustling bazaars, towering minarets, and thriving communities of scholars, artisans, and merchants from every corner of the known world. They were beacons of civilization, centers of learning and innovation. But now you see only the ghosts of their former selves, outlines of walls, fragments of pottery, and the enduring silence. One mainstream historical fact about these lost cities: many once flourishing cities along the Silk Road, such as Xanadu Ani or Subashi, eventually declined and were abandoned, due to a combination of factors including shifts in trade routes, political upheaval, environmental changes like desertification or water source depletion, and devastating invasions or plagues. Their rise and fall mirrored the volatile fortunes of the Silk Road itself. Here's a quirky tidbit. Archaeological digs in some of these lost cities have uncovered incredible, sometimes bizarre, artifacts. Imagine unearthing ancient children's toys, discarded amulets, or even perfectly preserved food items from centuries ago due to the arid climate. In some cases, entire ancient garbage dumps have yielded more historical information than grand palaces, providing a unique insight into the daily lives of these long-gone inhabitants. It's like finding a 1,500-year-old receipt for a camel burger and realizing that even back then, people probably complained about the portion size. Historians still argue whether the decline of specific Silk Road cities was primarily due to external factors like climate change or invasions, or internal factors such as political mismanagement, economic shifts, or local conflicts. Some scholars emphasize the impact of environmental degradation, particularly the drying up of vital water sources. Others point to the disruptive force of powerful empires, or the eventual shift towards maritime trade routes as key contributors to their downfall. It's a complex interplay of forces that led to their demise. As you wander through the ruins, the wind carries the dust of centuries. You can almost hear the phantom echoes of merchant calls, the chatter of crowds, the distant sounds of music. These cities thrived on the lifeblood of trade. When the caravans stopped coming, or when a new, more convenient route emerged, their lifeline was severed. Their economies, once robust, withered. People moved on, seeking opportunities elsewhere, and the sand or the encroaching wilderness slowly reclaimed what was once theirs. It's a powerful lesson in the impermanence of even the grandest human endeavors. The decline of these cities wasn't always sudden. It was often a gradual process, a slow bleed as trade diminished, resources dwindled, and populations dispersed. But in some cases, catastrophic events like the Mongol invasions in the 13th century led to swift and brutal destruction. Cities that had flourished for centuries were razed in a matter of days, their inhabitants massacred or enslaved, leaving behind only desolate ruins to tell the tale. The Silk Road, for all its wonders, had a dark, destructive side too. Nightfall among these ruins is particularly eerie. The vast, empty spaces seem to amplify every rustle of wind, every distant animal call. You try to imagine what life was like here, the dreams and dramas played out within these crumbling walls. You envision the merchants counting their profits, the scholars poring over ancient texts by lamplight, the families gathered around their hearths. Now, only shadows dance in the moonlight, and the silence is profound, save for the whisper of the wind through the ghost of a doorway. These lost cities are a poignant reminder that the Silk Road was not just a static map, but a dynamic living system, constantly adapting, expanding, and contracting. Its arteries pulsed with life, nourishing the cities along its path, and when the pulse faded so, too did the cities. But even in their decay, they serve as silent witnesses to the incredible human story of connection, ambition, and the relentless march of time. As you settle down for the night, amidst the echoes of a forgotten past, you feel a peculiar connection to these vanished civilizations, their dreams now part of the vast open silence of the Silk Road. The air, which a moment ago felt thick with the echoes of past suffering, now carries a different kind of current, one of ingenuity and human cleverness. As you continue your journey, Perhaps passing through a settlement where a new type of water wheel turns lazily in a stream, you begin to notice the subtle yet profound ways technological innovations illuminated the darkness and eased the monumental challenges of travel along the Silk Road. This wasn't just about moving existing goods. It was about moving knowledge, and that knowledge often manifested in practical tools and techniques that made the impossible merely very difficult. Think about the incredible impact of paper originating from China. Before paper writing was done on cumbersome bamboo strips, expensive parchment, or fragile silk, imagine trying to carry a library of information on a camel. Using bamboo paper revolutionized record-keeping, allowing for easier accounting mapping and the spread of written knowledge, essential for managing complex trade networks. It lessened the load for merchants and scribes alike. You can almost feel the smooth surface of an ancient paper document, a tangible link to a world that suddenly became much more efficient. One mainstream historical fact about these illuminations: Chinese innovations like paper printing, initially woodblock gunpowder, and the compass were profoundly transmitted westward, along the Silk Road, gradually transforming societies and technologies in the Middle East and Europe. These weren't just novelties. They were foundational technologies that spurred further innovation and reshaped warfare navigation and intellectual life. Here's a quirky tidbit. While the compass was a major navigation tool, early versions weren't always mounted in a neat little box. Sometimes they were just a magnetized needle floating in a bowl of water. Imagine trying to navigate a rough sea or a bumpy desert path with a tiny wobbly needle in a bowl. You'd need incredibly steady hands, or perhaps just a very calm camel. Hold still, Reginald, my navigation depends on it. Historians still argue whether the transmission of these technologies was a direct, purposeful transfer, or a more gradual, organic process of diffusion and adaptation. Some scholars suggest that specific envoys or skilled craftsmen intentionally carried these secrets. Others argue that it was more of a slow seep, with technologies being observed reverse-engineered and independently developed in different regions after initial exposure. It's a debate about the speed and intentionality of technological exchange. Beyond paper and printing, consider the advancements in metallurgy. Chinese steel-making techniques were highly advanced, producing stronger and more flexible weapons and tools, which surely traveled westward. Similarly, the development of sophisticated irrigation systems and water-lifting devices like the noria, a type of water wheel, allowed for the growth of agriculture in arid Silk Road regions, supporting larger populations and, by extension, larger caravans. Imagine the relief of a dusty merchant arriving at a well-watered oasis, knowing that a steady supply of fresh produce was available. Because of smart, ancient engineering, architectural innovations also traveled. The distinctive domed structures and intricate tile work of Central Asian and Persian caravanserais provided robust, climate-controlled shelters for travelers and their animals, vastly improving comfort and security compared to crude makeshift camps. These architectural styles themselves became part of the cultural exchange, influencing building practices further along the route. Even innovations in animal husbandry were crucial. The selective breeding of stronger, more enduring camel breeds or hardier horses improved the efficiency and resilience of transport. Knowledge about veterinary care, animal feeding, and specialized saddle designs like the humped camel saddle that allowed for more stable load distribution was passed down, easing the physical strain on the animals and making longer journeys more feasible. As dusk settles and the stars begin to emerge, you might see a merchant using a simple yet ingenious oil lamp to illuminate their ledger. Its steady flame, a testament to practical design. Or perhaps you'd hear discussions about the latest advancements in cartography as travelers compared notes on routes and landmarks, slowly piecing together a more accurate understanding of the vast world. These nighttime innovations were often born of necessity, simple solutions to complex problems, but their cumulative effect was profound. The Silk Road wasn't just a conduit for static inventions. It was a living laboratory, a place where different peoples encountered new ways of doing things, sparking curiosity and adaptation. It demonstrated humanity's relentless drive to solve problems, to make life a little easier, a little safer, and to see a little further into the darkness. And as you prepare for sleep, the soft glow of a distant fire, powered by a simple wick and oil, seems to embody this enduring spirit of human ingenuity, casting light on the path ahead. The air, which a moment ago felt thick with the echoes of past suffering, now carries a different kind of current, one of ingenuity and human cleverness. As you continue your journey, perhaps passing through a settlement where a new type of water wheel turns lazily in a stream, you begin to notice the subtle yet profound ways technological innovations illuminated the darkness and eased the monumental challenges of travel along the Silk Road. This wasn't just about moving existing goods, it was about moving knowledge, and that knowledge often manifested in practical tools and techniques that made the impossible merely very difficult. Think about the incredible impact of paper originating from China. Before paper writing was done on cumbersome bamboo strips, expensive parchment, or fragile silk, imagine trying to carry a library of information on a camel using bamboo paper revolutionized record keeping, allowing for easier accounting mapping and the spread of written knowledge, essential for managing complex trade networks. It lightened the load for merchants and scribes alike. You can almost feel the smooth surface of an ancient paper document, a tangible link to a world that suddenly became much more efficient. One mainstream historical fact about these illuminations: Chinese innovations like paper printing, initially woodblock gunpowder, and the compass were profoundly transmitted westward along the Silk Road, gradually transforming societies and technologies in the Middle East and Europe. These weren't just novelties. They were foundational technologies that spurred further innovation and reshaped warfare navigation and intellectual life. Here's a quirky tidbit. While the compass was a major navigation tool, early versions weren't always mounted in a neat little box. Sometimes they were just a magnetized needle floating in a bowl of water. Imagine trying to navigate a rough sea or a bumpy desert path with a tiny, wobbly needle in a bowl. You'd need incredibly steady hands, or perhaps just a very calm camel. Hold still, Reginald. My navigation depends on it. Historians still argue whether the transmission of these technologies was a direct, purposeful transfer, or a more gradual, organic process of diffusion and adaptation. Some scholars suggest that specific envoys or skilled craftsmen intentionally carried these secrets. Others argue that it was more of a slow seep, with technologies being observed reverse-engineered and independently developed in different regions after initial exposure. It's a debate about the speed and intentionality of technological exchange. Beyond paper and printing, consider the advancements in metallurgy. Chinese steel-making techniques were highly advanced, producing stronger and more flexible weapons and tools, which surely traveled westward. Similarly, The development of sophisticated irrigation systems and water lifting devices like the noria, a type of water wheel, allowed for the growth of agriculture in arid Silk Road regions, supporting larger populations and, by extension, larger caravans. Imagine the relief of a dusty merchant arriving at a well-watered oasis, knowing that a steady supply of fresh produce was available because of smart, ancient engineering. Architectural innovations also traveled. The distinctive domed structures and intricate tilework of Central Asian and Persian caravanserais provided robust, climate-controlled shelters for travelers, and their animals vastly improving comfort and security compared to crude makeshift camps. These architectural styles themselves became part of the cultural exchange influencing building practices further along the route. Even innovations in animal husbandry were crucial. The selective breeding of stronger, more enduring camel breeds or hardier horses improved the efficiency and resilience of transport. Knowledge about veterinary care, animal feeding, and specialized saddle designs, like the humped camel saddle that allowed for more stable load distribution, was passed down, easing the physical strain on the animals and making longer journeys more feasible. As dusk settles and the stars begin to emerge, you might see a merchant using a simple yet ingenious oil lamp to illuminate their ledger, its steady flame a testament to practical design. Or perhaps you'd hear discussions about the latest advancements in cartography as travelers compared notes on routes and landmarks, slowly piecing together a more accurate understanding of the vast world. These nighttime innovations were often born of necessity, simple solutions to complex problems, but their cumulative effect was profound. The Silk Road wasn't just a conduit for static inventions. It was a living laboratory, a place where different peoples encountered new ways of doing things, sparking curiosity and adaptation. It demonstrated humanity's relentless drive to solve problems, to make life a little easier, a little safer, and to see a little further into the darkness. And as you prepare for sleep, the soft glow of a distant fire, powered by a simple wick and oil, seems to embody this enduring spirit of human ingenuity, casting light on the path ahead. As the dawn breaks, painting the horizon in soft pastels, you notice something often overlooked in the grand narratives of kings and commerce: the quiet yet vital presence of women on the Silk Road. They weren't always leading expeditions or signing major trade treaties, but their roles were incredibly diverse and absolutely essential to the functioning of these ancient routes. From the nomadic encampments to the bustling market towns, women were not merely passive observers. They were active participants, shaping the fabric of daily life, and in many cases directly facilitating the journey. Imagine the women of the nomadic tribes effortlessly setting up and dismantling the yurts, managing the livestock, processing wool into felt, and preparing the vital, calorie-rich meals that sustained their families, and visiting merchants. Their skills in crafts like weaving and felt making produced goods that were themselves valuable commodities for trade. They were the backbone of nomadic life, their efficiency and resilience critical for survival in harsh environments. You see a woman expertly milking a yak, her movements practiced, and strong a testament to a lifetime of essential work. One mainstream historical fact about these quiet journeys: while often less documented than male merchants or warriors, women participated in Silk Road life in various capacities, as artisans producing trade goods like weavers, and silk producers, as wives and family members accompanying male travelers, especially in settled communities, as innkeepers, and managers of caravanserais, and even, in rare instances, as independent merchants or religious figures. Their presence was a constant, if sometimes silent, thread in the Silk Road's tapestry. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some historical accounts suggest that female entertainers, like dancers and musicians, also traveled along the Silk Road bringing their art forms from one culture to another. Imagine a Persian dancer performing for a Chinese court, or a Central Asian musician introducing new instruments or melodies to a distant audience. These women were cultural ambassadors in their own right, their performances offering a moment of beauty and respite from the rigors of travel. They were in a sense the ancient world's traveling rock stars, but probably with fewer pyrotechnics. Historians still argue whether the roles of women on the Silk Road were predominantly restricted to domestic spheres, or if they had more autonomy and economic agency than often portrayed in traditional historical narratives. Some scholars point to the highly patriarchal structures of many societies along the route as limiting women's public roles. Others highlight archaeological evidence and occasional textual references that suggest women managed businesses, owned property, and engaged in trade, particularly in Central Asian societies, where women often held higher status. It's a debate about uncovering the often hidden stories of half the population. In the settled towns and caravanserai, women often ran the local markets, bartering goods, preparing food for travelers, and managing guest houses. They were the ones who provided the crucial services that allowed merchants to rest and resupply. You might encounter an innkeeper's wife, her hands calloused from work expertly serving tea and negotiating prices for a night's lodging. These weren't grand roles in the eyes of chroniclers, but they were the bedrock of the entire system, providing the necessary infrastructure for sustained trade. For women who traveled as part of merchant families or religious entourages, the journey itself was a profound experience. They endured the same hardships as the men: the scorching deserts, the treacherous mountains, the threat of bandits, and the scourge of disease. Their resilience was just as vital for the survival of the group. Imagine a mother protecting her children through a sandstorm, or caring for a sick family member far from any doctor. Their strength was often tested, and their spirit unyielding. And then there were the women of power: empresses, princesses, and aristocratic ladies, who, though not directly traveling the routes, were instrumental in driving the demand for the luxury goods that fueled the Silk Road. The desire for exquisite silks, precious jewels, and exotic perfumes among the elite women of Rome, Byzantium, China, and Persia created a powerful economic incentive for merchants to undertake these perilous journeys. They were the ultimate consumers, the unspoken force behind much of the transcontinental trade. As night falls and the camp settles into a quiet hum, you reflect on these unseen narratives. The Silk Road wasn't just a story of men on camels. It was a vast, sprawling human endeavor shaped by the contributions of everyone involved, including the countless women whose lives, though often unwritten, were intrinsically woven into the fabric of these ancient routes. Their strength, their labor, their artistry, and their resilience were as much a part of the Silk Road's enduring legacy as any emperor's decree or merchant's ledger. And as you drift off, you hear the quiet echoes of their lives, a gentle presence in the vast silence. The journey is nearing its end, the vastness of the Silk Road gradually contracting in your mind, but its echoes resonate more powerfully than ever. As you move through a modern-day city, perhaps seeing cargo containers being loaded onto ships or trains, you begin to grasp the profound, enduring legacy of these ancient paths. The Silk Road wasn't just a historical footnote. It was a blueprint, a foundational layer upon which much of our modern global interconnectedness is built. Its spirit, the very idea of bridging vast distances for trade and exchange, lives on in the intricate global supply chains that define our world today. Think about the sheer audacity of those early travelers, forging paths where none existed, connecting civilizations that barely knew of each other's existence. That pioneering spirit of exploration and economic ambition is precisely what drives globalization today. The Internet, arguably, is the modern Silk Road, a network for the instant exchange of information, ideas, and even goods mirroring the ancient roots, but at an exponentially faster pace. You can order something from China today, and it arrives on your doorstep in days, not months or years. That fundamental desire for goods from distant lands for cultural exchange, for economic opportunity, it hasn't changed only the speed and scale. One mainstream historical fact about this enduring legacy: the Silk Road profoundly shaped the development of global trade, cultural exchange, and technological diffusion for over a millennium, laying the groundwork for the interconnected world we inhabit today. Its existence fostered the concept of a global economy long before the term was coined, demonstrating the immense value of cross-cultural interaction. Here's a quirky tidbit. Consider the humble noodle. While its exact origin is debated, the concept of noodles is thought to have spread from China westward, along the Silk Road, influencing countless cuisines from Italian pasta to various Central Asian dishes. So the next time you're slurping down a bowl of spaghetti, you're enjoying a direct culinary descendant of ancient Silk Road cultural exchange. Who knew historical legacy could be so delicious? Historians still argue whether the Silk Road's end was a definitive event or a gradual, prolonged decline due to the rise of maritime trade routes. Some scholars point to the age of exploration and the dominance of sea lanes as the definitive death knell for overland trade. Others argue that the Silk Road merely adapted and continued to function on a more regional basis, never truly dying, but evolving into a different form. It's a debate about how we define the beginning and end of such a vast and complex historical phenomenon. The Silk Road's legacy isn't just economic, it's deeply cultural. The spread of religions, artistic styles, philosophies, and even languages across Eurasia created a rich tapestry of hybrid cultures that still exist today. The influences of Persian art and Chinese ceramics, or Buddhist philosophy and Central Asian traditions, are living testaments to this ancient exchange. When you see a Persian rug, or taste a dish flavored with spices from India, you're experiencing a direct lineage to the Silk Road. It's ingrained in our everyday lives often without us even realizing it. Even the concept of cultural appropriation has its roots in this ancient exchange. The idea that ideas and goods moved from one culture to another were adopted, and sometimes transformed beyond recognition. But unlike some modern debates on the Silk Road, this was largely an organic, mutually beneficial process that enriched all involved. It was a shared journey of discovery. The diplomatic lessons of the Silk Road are also profound. The need for peaceful coexistence, for establishing trust between disparate groups, and for understanding different customs was crucial for trade to flourish. It demonstrated that commerce could be a powerful force for diplomacy, fostering understanding and common ground, even between potential adversaries. It was a form of ancient soft power, driven by mutual economic benefit. As night falls, you look up at the familiar stars, the same constellations that guided ancient travelers. You reflect on the incredible journey you've taken not just through space and time, but through the very essence of human connection. The Silk Road, in its vastness and complexity, is a powerful reminder that our world has always been interconnected, a grand tapestry woven from the threads of trade adventure and the unyielding human desire to explore, to connect, and to thrive. Its enduring legacy lives on in every cargo ship, every international flight, every global communication, a testament to the pioneers who first dared to dream of a connected world. The last embers of the mental campfire flicker and fade, and the distant sounds of the Silk Road, the creak of camel saddles, the murmuring of ancient tongues, the whisper of wind through forgotten ruins begin to soften. You've journeyed through scorching deserts and climbed frigid mountains, navigated bustling bazaars, and witnessed the silent flow of ideas. Now, as the screen of your mind darkens, the immense, sprawling narrative of the Silk Road gently draws to a close, a vast chapter in the human story, settling into the quiet archives of history. As you lie there, the world outside your window becoming indistinct in the quiet of the night, allow the final images of this ancient world to dissolve. The vivid colors of silk, the pungent aroma of spices, the glint of distant stars over an empty desert. Let them all soften, blur, and fade. There's no need to cling to the details, only to the feeling of immense distances spanned, of connections, forged of ingenuity, tested and proven under skies that have watched for millennia. The echoes of those ancient footsteps, the whispers of long-lost conversations, and the weight of countless unseen goods have been carried on the winds of time right to your bedside. You've touched a fragment of that vast network, connected to the intrepid souls who dared to venture forth, seeking profit, knowledge, or simply a new horizon. Their tales, mundane and epic, have become part of your own quiet, sleepy narrative. Now, let the remaining thoughts drift away like wisps of smoke from a distant campfire. The journey is complete, the tales told. All that remains is the soft, comforting blanket of peace and stillness. Your mind, having traveled so far, deserves its rest. Let the silence of the night embrace you, and may your dreams be as vast and wondrous as the ancient paths we've explored together. End of script. Sweet dreams.